Good afternoon. I am Corporal Deanna Fontaine, Media Relations Manager with the Alberta RCMP Media Relations Group. We have invited you today to announce the arrest and charges laid against an adult male in relation to the November 4th shooting of 44-year-old Cordell MacLellan in Edson. Bon après-midi. Je suis la caporale Deanna Fontaine, gestionnaire du groupe de relations avec les médias de la GRC en Alberta. Nous vous avons invité aujourd'hui pour annoncer l'arrestation et la mise en accusation d'un homme à la suite de la mort par balle de Cordell MacLellan, 44 ans, le 4 novembre à Edson. Inspector Rick Jenny, officer in charge of the Alberta RCMP Serious Crimes Branch South, will provide a statement and then take your questions. L'inspecteur Rick Jenny, officier responsable du service divisionnaire des crimes graves sud de la GRC en Alberta, fera une déclaration puis répondra à vos questions. Inspector Rick Jenny, please go ahead. Inspecteur Rick Jenny, la parole est à vous.
Good afternoon. I'm Inspector Rick Jenny, an Operations Officer of the Alberta RCMP Serious Crime Branch. The Alberta RCMP Major Crimes Unit's investigation into the November 4th fatal shooting of 44-year-old Cordell MacLellan of Edson has resulted in the arrest of Brent Michael Dumas, age 21, of Yellowhead County, Alberta. Dumas is charged with first-degree murder, possession of a prohibited firearm, possession of a firearm contrary to a prohibition order, and assault with a weapon. The RCMP alleged that Dumas entered an Edson business with a firearm and attempted to commit a robbery. During the interaction, the suspect discharged the from Edson was assaulted by the suspect during a physical altercation that occurred inside the store. The suspect, who was unsuccessful in the robbery attempt, fled the business, leaving the firearm behind, and departed in a stolen vehicle. The stolen vehicle was located a short distance away, unoccupied. Cordell MacLellan was taken to hospital by an emergency medical services. However, he died as a result of his injuries. After further investigation on December 11th at 4 p.m., with the assistance of the Edson RCMP, Alberta RCMP Major Crimes attempted to arrest Dumas. However, he fled into a treat area north of Highway 16 and east of Highway 32 near Carrot Creek. The suspect was contained, awaiting additional resources from the RCMP Police Dog Service and the Alberta RCMP Emergency Response Team. As the RCMP Air Services was unavailable to assist, Edmonton Police Air Service Air 1 provided assistance. At approximately 6:40 p.m., Dumas was taken into custody by the Alberta RCMP Emergency Response Team without incident. Dumas is scheduled to appear in Edson Provincial Court via CCTV on January 18th, 2022. Before I move to questions, I would like to address some concerns the Alberta RCMP have heard from the community and the media. First, I'd like to address the concern that no description or surveillance photos were shared with the public. Investigators elected not to release a description as it would have been so vague as to have had little investigative value. And while I'm not able to get into the specifics or give an exact timeline, investigators had identified a potential suspect, and we needed to carefully review the evidence and gather it to connect that individual to the shooting. When conducting any investigation, police need to evaluate what information we release to the public in order to both protect the accused's right to a fair trial, as well as maximizing our ability to gather evidence. To publicly say we have a suspect before being able to properly build a case and lay charges may cause the suspect to flee or destroy evidence. A second point of concern was that no emergency alert message was issued for the community of Edson and the surrounding area. There was nothing to suggest that there was an active, ongoing threat to the greater public outside of the fatal shooting. While police recognize the value in issuing emergency alerts to protect the public, It needs to be issued when it will enhance public safety by providing information that allows the public to take some action, such as sheltering in place. Had the circumstances been different, or had they changed, the Alberta RCMP would have certainly issued an emergency alert. I will now repeat this statement in French before we open the news conference for questions. Bonjour, je suis l'inspecteur Rick Janet, agent responsable des opérations pour la section des crimes graves de la GRC de l'Alberta. L'enquête du groupe des crimes majeurs de la GRC de l'Alberta concernant le décès par balle de Cordell MacLellan, 44 ans, d'Edson, le 4 novembre dernier, a mené à l'arrestation de Brent Michael Dumas, 21 ans, du comté de Yellowhead en Alberta. Monsieur Dumas est accusé de meurtre au premier degré, de possession d'une arme à feu prohibée, de possession d'une arme en contravention d'une ordonnance d'interdiction et d'agression armée. Selon la GRC, M. Dumas serait entré dans un commerce d'Edson avec une arme à feu et aurait tenté de commettre un vol qualifié. Durant l'interaction, le suspect a tiré des coups de feu, un coup de feu qui a blessé Cordell MacLellan. Avant de prendre fuite, le suspect a agressé un second employé, un homme de 32 ans d'Edson, lors d'une empoignade à l'intérieur du commerce. Le suspect, dont la tentative de vol s'est avérée vaine, s'est enfui à bord d'un véhicule volé en laissant l'arme à feu sur place. Le véhicule volé a été retrouvé vide à proximité. Cordell MacLellan a été transporté à l'hôpital par les services médicaux d'urgence. Il est toutefois décédé de ses blessures. Après une enquête approfondie, le 11 décembre à 16 h, avec l'aide de la GRC d'Edson, le groupe des crimes majeurs de la GRC de l'Alberta a tenté d'arrêter M. Dumas. Il s'est toutefois enfui dans un secteur boisé au nord de la route 16, à l'est de la route 32, près de Carrot Creek. Les agents ont encerclé le suspect en attendant des ressources additionnelles de la section cynophile de la GRC et du groupe d'intervention tactique de la GRC de l'Alberta. Étant donné que le service de l'air de la GRC de l'Alberta n'était pas disponible, l'hélicoptère Air One du service de police d'Edmonton leur a prêté main forte. Vers 18h40, M. Dumas a été appréhendé par le groupe d'intervention tactique de la GRC de l'Alberta sans incident. M. Dumas doit comparaître devant le tribunal provincial d'Edson par vidéo le 18 janvier 2022. Avant de passer aux questions, j'aimerais aborder certaines des préoccupations que la GRC de l'Alberta a entendues de la communauté et des médias. Je veux d'abord répondre à la préoccupation relative au fait qu'aucune description ni photo de surveillance n'ont été rendues publiques. Les enquêteurs ont décidé de ne pas diffuser de description car elle aurait été trop vague et n'aurait eu aucune valeur pour l'enquête. Et bien que je ne puisse pas donner des détails ni de chronologie exacte, les enquêteurs avaient identifié un suspect potentiel et devaient recueillir soigneusement des preuves pour associer cette personne à la fusillade. Lors d'une enquête, la police doit évaluer quelle information rendre publique afin de protéger le droit de l'accusé à un procès équitable, d'une part, et de maximiser sa capacité à recueillir des éléments de preuve, d'autre part. Si l'on affirme publiquement avoir un suspect avant de pouvoir monter adéquatement un dossier et déposer des accusations, celui-ci pourrait s'enfuir ou détruire les éléments de preuve. Une autre préoccupation soulevée est qu'aucun message d'alerte d'urgence n'a été émis pour la collectivité d'Edson et les environs. Rien n'indiquait qu'il y avait une menace active en cours pour le grand public, autre que la fusillade mortelle. Bien que la police reconnaisse l'utilité de l'émission d'alertes d'urgence pour protéger le public, ces alertes doivent être émises lorsqu'elles augmentent la sécurité du public en fournissant des renseignements qui permettent au public de prendre des mesures, par exemple, se permettre à l'abri sur place. Si les circonstances avaient changé, la GRC de l'Alberta aurait certainement émis une alerte d'urgence. Merci and thank you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Inspector. Thanks for taking our questions. I guess my question just is, what did you learn in the 5-week period between this incident and the arrest? I think it was a little over 5 weeks. What did you learn that finally led you to Dumas?
So, as you can appreciate, this case is now before the courts. I can tell you, speaking more generally, because it would be improper for me to give, precise details about the evidence that has not yet been tendered, and the accused will be entitled to have any evidence that we have challenged by his lawyer if he chooses to do so. But I can tell you that in any investigation, homicide investigations can unfold in a number of different ways. We do have certainly some homicides, and statistics show that there's a certain percentage that we make an arrest within 24 hours. In most cases, those homicides occur under circumstances where there's eyewitnesses, people that can provide clear evidence of who is responsible to police and allow police to move to an arrest very quickly. And that does happen across the country in a significant number of cases. But in other cases, such as this one, it takes more time to gather the evidence sufficient to allow us to have a viable charge. And the types of things that we do in these types of investigations are try to gather additional evidence, both by submitting exhibits to the lab, forensic lab, and other types of labs. The RCMP labs provided very good turnaround times. We got requested and received expedited timelines to have our exhibits analyzed. And we need to pull that evidence together from evidence that we gained through obtaining judicial authorizations and production order results, which companies have, don't provide instantaneous responses, but they do their best to comply with the orders in a timely manner. And so during that 4 to 5 week period, the evidence was being gathered, analyzed. We were also ensuring that we considered any possible alternative suspects so that we knew that when we moved to arrest the suspect, we could provide him the evidence that we had gathered, as well as be able to ensure that we could make timely disclosure to his lawyer and himself so that he can be judged fairly in the courts to determine whether he's guilty or innocent.
And during that 4 to 5 week period, you said there's nothing to suggest there was an active ongoing threat. At the same time, you have a killer on the loose. Like, how do you, you talked about, answering questions about people concerned about that period of time. I mean, what gave you confidence during that period that there somehow couldn't suddenly be a threat, given that, someone who's out, hiding from the authorities could be considered dangerous or desperate?
100%. Mr. Gromit, I definitely understand your question. I understand it's a question the public shares. What I can say is that what we need to balance is being sure that when we arrest somebody, we can not just arrest them and release them, because that's what we would have to do if we didn't have sufficient evidence to satisfy the courts that we have a reasonable likelihood of conviction. And so we need to balance the urgency of the public and the public's desire to have us arrest people as quickly as we can, with the need to be ensured that when we do arrest them, we have done a thorough job, both to ensure we've arrested the correct person and to ensure that when the evidence is presented in court, that we have the best chance possible of supporting the prosecution with a case that is strong. And so the challenge we have, and I understand that, I mean, this province, like any other province, has a certain number of murders every year, and they cause a significant amount of concern for members of the public. They still are a relatively rare event, but at the same time, as a manager who oversees a unit that investigates, on average more than 50 homicides a year, we're trying to balance the need to move quickly with the need to move effectively in a way that is going to actually provide long-term public safety. And the best way, and I'm not going to speak about Mr. Dumas here, but the best way that the RCMP and any other police agency can do our best to enhance public safety when it comes to homicide suspects is to not just charge them or arrest them, but to actually successfully prosecute them so that they can be given an appropriate sentence that will further protect the public for the years, for whatever the courts deem as the appropriate conviction and the appropriate time frame, which any quick arrest that is premature would undermine those objectives and actually undermine public safety in the long term.
Part of what we tried to address was the alert question about an emergency alert. So that was in the immediacy of the event. And when I spoke to some of you guys following this case, we could never say that there wasn't a continued threat because the reality is that an individual committed an offense with a firearm that resulted in a death. And so although the threshold wasn't met for an emergency alert at the time, we couldn't say that there was no risk to the public here. But we knew that we continued to investigate, if that helps at all.
It does, thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. I see from an earlier news release issued by RCMP that the suspect. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
I can
go
still
ahead.
hear you.
That the suspect in this case was known to police, had previously been charged for another firearms offense, and furthermore had a lifetime firearms prohibition. Could you speak to that, please?
Well, as I said in the the original prepared statement, he has been charged with possession of a firearm contrary to prohibition order. In terms of his exact criminal record, in order to ensure that he's given every opportunity to have a fair trial, I don't feel it would be appropriate, given that we don't know, whether.
And we're not able to speak to a person's past criminal record. That's not something due to privacy considerations under the privacy legislation. We're not able to speak to that. Yeah.
Hi, I had a very similar question. My understanding is Mr. Dumas does have a bit of a history involving weapons. I know you can't speak to that, but knowing that history as an investigative tool, knowing the history, would that not have elevated your concerns? I know you said that when he fled the scene that you felt there was no longer a public threat. I wonder why that would be, knowing that he had access to prohibited weapons in the past and could again in this time frame.
Yeah, to be clear, it's a fair question. I'm not saying that there was zero threat. I mean, policing is always about managing risk, and there is always potential threats, and we don't approach any situation, even an unknown risk situation, as being without threat. We were in a situation where first of all, it would not meet the criteria for an Amber Alert, but there are provincial emergency alerts that we can explore as well. And for us to be able to utilize that system, we do need to have information that's going to assist the public in enhancing their safety. We didn't have enough information to put out, a meaningful description that would have assisted the public. We didn't have a suspect vehicle because we found that suspect vehicle within an hour. We didn't have any reason to believe that, having been thwarted at his robbery, he would immediately proceed to committing more crimes. If there was new complaints coming in of additional crimes being perpetrated, even if we didn't know who was responsible, that would have been information we would have assessed to try to determine whether we needed to explore an emergency alert. It is not a black and white decision. It's something that's constantly evolving as we conduct a risk assessment. But in this case, it was a situation where we did not have a basis, because we did not have the ability to arrest him at that time. And so again, if anything, our concern would be if we were to create an environment where the offender or the suspect felt like he was being hunted and spooked, that actually can escalate the risk to the public as a person becomes desperate and tries to take evasive action. We wanted this suspect to feel comfortable, and with that passage of time, the likelihood of committing another offense just because of this offense goes down. We know that some people do commit offenses, and I'm certainly not going to comment on whether Mr. Dumas' propensity, but we evaluate all those things when we try to assess what the proper steps to do in terms of sharing information with the public is.
Thank you. And just one quick one. I know that your organization has probably reviewed this at some length. Is there, in looking back at it, is there an opportunity to engage the public more or provide some information, or is it, upon reflection, the way that it was handled the way you would handle future cases? Was there a chance for the public to have given some sense of what was happening? It feels like there's a bit of a communication, what's the word? Lack of communication on this one, at least from our perspective. You may have a different perspective. So.
Yeah, so I guess I would say two things. One is, in terms of the original media release, which was done in about 21 hours after the incident, the decision not to provide information earlier was a combination of, was really largely driven by the fact that we were trying to do our best to perform next of kin notification to the people that need to be notified of the deceased murder, and some of those people were out of province, and that took some time. It also allowed us to provide a better a better picture to the public as to what occurred. So that was the initial reason. This investigation itself, we had the evidence that we needed to be able, and we were waiting on results from the analysis of pieces of that evidence, but it wasn't a case where we weren't, where we were concerned that we needed to make public appeals. Public appeals for more information can be helpful in some investigations, but they also create challenges, because you can sometimes get information, that is meant to be helpful, but is really speculative. And so we don't actively solicit information, in terms of tips, unless there's an investigative value to that. And in this investigation, based on how the investigation unfolded, it didn't make sense to be proactively seeking tips or sharing more than we had shared.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you had any more details on the arrest from the 11th. What time of day did you initiate it? I know you said when he was actually arrested, I think it was 6:40 p.m. I was just wondering what sort of length of time there was, and where exactly in relation to Edson this search for Mr. Dumas occurred.
Okay, so it was approximately at 4 p.m. when the arrest occurred, and essentially the RCMP were looking for Mr. Dumas actively, and were able to make contact with a vehicle that contained him, and that's when the arrest was attempted. And then ultimately, because we had a situation where we weren't able to arrest him at that actual vehicle scene, we did have to set up containment and get in additional resources, and we had good cooperation. And I want to thank the Edmonton Police Service for sharing their air support with us. And we had the emergency response team also involved, given that we had a flight from police that we were managing. And the actual arrest took place without incident, and we were grateful that the event was without any significant impact. It was in a relatively isolated area where we were able to notify any citizens in the immediate vicinity, like neighbors, and make sure that they were taking steps to ensure their safety, but we did not have a need to do a wider media notification or public emergency notification the way that event unfolded. I will maybe ask if I could just also add one other comment, which I'm sure you guys do recognize, is that we are always trying to balance. The public safety is of a primary importance, and it comes before investigators. It comes before the family. Public safety, threats to public safety that are credible and need to be managed, we will seek to manage them in a way that they need to be managed. But we also need to, in order to enhance public safety across all investigations, I think we all recognize the need to be judicious in how often we do emergency alerts, because if we are doing emergency alerts as a really routine matter, we are going to lose the impact those emergency alerts will have in terms of influencing public behavior and protecting people.
David's question is, does the business sell firearms, And is that being looked at as the potential motive or target of the robbery and not random at all?
So we recognize that the name of the business has been reported in some avenues. It hasn't been released by the RCMP because we are sensitive to the fact that anytime a tragedy occurs, that tragedy itself is traumatic, obviously, from the people who have lost loved ones, for employees, and the business itself. It also can have potentially negative impacts on the business itself. And so we're not looking to compound any of those impacts. And so we have decided to not, and we don't, as a normal course, we really, unless it's integral to the story, we do not generally name businesses in our media availabilities and media speaking points. But in terms of the motive, that is one thing that is under investigation and will need to be established, or at least may be established in court. But it would be premature for me to make claims as to the motive of the accused in this matter. And so that's all I can say on this.
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering if notification of next of kin was an issue in this case.
It was only an issue insofar as it takes time to actually contact people across time zones, but we've had good cooperation from the family of the people who've been impacted by this. And in terms of the actual, I can tell you that we strive whenever possible to do notifications in person. There's often some coordination among police agencies to do that, and these things do take some time. In terms of the exact time frame that the family was notified, I don't think that all the people that need to be notified were notified until the following day, and that's one of the reasons for the delay in the media release into the day after the event, which occurred in the early evening.